Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about some interesting rumors that just dropped having to do with both Metroid, Zelda, and a little bit more from Nintendo. A lot of this new information, while certainly information you should take with a grain of salt because it is rumor, do not believe it full-heartedly, is coming from sources that have gotten a lot of things right in the past. Not everything, but a lot right, and if this information proves to be true, it would have some very big implications in terms of what we're going to be seeing from Nintendo in terms of their announcements over the coming months. And so it's interesting. So that's what we're getting into today. But before going forward, let me point out that I'm getting also close to 60,000 subscribers. Hopefully it happens soon. So if you find yourself enjoying my videos and you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate your subscription. So, the sources for these rumors are coming from Attack the Backlog and Nash Weedle. Attack the Backlog just put out a podcast. It will be linked in the description below. It's a great listen. Check it out. There's a lot of other things discussed in this podcast, a lot of third-party stuff that I will not be covering in this video. But yes, there's some really interesting stuff there. It will be linked. It's in Spanish, but there are English subtitles. So yeah, definitely a good listen. Now, they talk about a lot of things, but where we're going to start here is with Metroid, because some of you may already be aware, we got a legitimate, concrete, totally super big leak for Metroid Ravenous. The Brazilian government leaked this out. We saw that Nintendo of America actually submitted for this title, Metroid Ravenous, to be rated in Brazil, and so that information got out there to the public. We now know about it, it's real, and Attack the Backlog is saying that Nintendo's actually really mad about this, like really mad about this. That is what he has heard. Now, we've been hearing that Nintendo's been pretty mad about leaks lately, like Star Fox was leaked, Ocarina of Time remake was leaked, and now Metroid Ravenous, even though it hasn't been officially announced yet, because of the leak, we know that's been leaked as well. And so Nintendo's been pretty annoyed by this stuff. A lot of their big, surprising announcements have been leaked beforehand. Now, me, myself, personally, I've been talking about this stuff. I've been expecting these announcements before they're officially confirmed for some time. We've been talking about this on the channel, and to me, it doesn't bother me. I have still really enjoyed these announcements, and the manner in which they are announced and what is shown, that's still been surprising to me. So my joy for these announcements haven't been impacted. I don't really see them as big spoilers, personally. But it is interesting to hear that Nintendo's even mad about this Metroid Ravenous thing, which, you know, wasn't even the fault of any leaker, because it was by the Brazilian government, because Nintendo of America, they themselves submitted for this rating, and that information got out there to the public somehow. Anyway, that's just the tip of the iceberg here. There's a lot more that they mention in terms of Metroid Ravenous. So Nash Weedle kind of elaborates, because he's actually been reporting on the next Metroid title for some time, and for those who are unfamiliar with Nash Weedle's history, he actually had leaked Metroid Dread before that was announced years ago, and that was kind of like one of his first big leaks that came true. But he was talking about in this podcast how Nintendo was actually hoping to announce Metroid Ravenous last year. However, that's not what happened. They felt that Mercury Steam was taking too long, and they gave them an extension, but Nintendo apparently was getting annoyed by this. And Nash Weedle talks about how there is a strained relationship here, and it's not just because Mercury Steam was taking too long with Metroid Ravenous, but also just because of the way they're conducting their business. Like, we've heard about a lot of layoffs. There have certainly been people talking about how they may be handling some of their employees, and so that could be playing a role here in terms of their strained relationship, and Nintendo apparently has even considered pulling the project from Mercury Steam, which I think would be kind of unfortunate, because we've seen that Mercury Steam's actually done some pretty good work with Metroid Samus Returns and Metroid Dread. And there's a little bit of an implication here that that Blades of Fire game that Mercury Steam also worked on may have led to some of these issues here, because they were focused on that. There's a lot of resources going into that, and not Metroid, which is a much bigger deal and has been a much greater success for them. And so the idea here is that perhaps there's just kind of like some poor decisions being made with management at Mercury Steam, which could be leading to this supposed strained relationship between Nintendo and Mercury Steam. Anyway, apparently Nintendo gave Mercury Steam an extension here, but it's still cutting it close, and there appears to be an implication that because of that, there's something else that's been in the works, and that would be a Super Metroid remake with a pixel-based art style. We've talked about this before. Now, we've talked about how the pixel part of this equation was leaked in a comment section in a Nintendo Forecast video, which leaked other things that were later revealed by Nate the Hate in his own podcast and such. So that's why a lot of people were buying into this information. But now Nash Weedle himself is also saying he's heard that this remake would be having a pixel-based art style, and you would think that something like this would have a smaller budget, would have a quicker turnaround, and would be an answer, something to tide fans over, while Mercury Steam finishes up with Metroid Ravenous, the next brand new 2D Metroid game to follow up Metroid Dread, Metroid 6. And so considering that it's Metroid's 40th anniversary, and we have a vacancy in August, where it is literally the anniversary month for Metroid, it makes you wonder, could Nintendo perhaps shadow drop this Super Metroid remake to give us something to enjoy as a Metroid fan, and then to tide us over until they're ready to show off Metroid Ravenous, the next big brand new Metroid? That would be really cool. However, Nash is saying that they're apparently handling even this project at a slow pace somehow, which seems a little odd to me. Also, we don't know who the developer is. You would assume that Mercury Steam's not handling this because they're focusing on just getting Metroid Ravenous out there, and so putting out a simpler but still really cool remake for Super Metroid from someone else that's pixel-based probably seems pretty doable. Personally, I would find it very weird if they're working on this to come out after Metroid Ravenous, at least based off the story of how Nintendo wanted Metroid Ravenous out sooner. However, something else that's come out from Nash Weedle about this Metroid Ravenous project is that apparently they were working on this to be a Nintendo Switch 1 and Nintendo Switch 2 title at first, which to me is also a real head scratcher. Like, if they were targeting a 2025 release, the launch year for the Nintendo Switch 2, which, by the way, we understand, or at least it's rumored, especially based off a lot of reports from many reputable outlets, that Nintendo initially wanted the Switch 2 out even sooner. So the idea that they were just making this as a Switch 1 title with Switch 2 enhancements seems odd to me. Like, why wouldn't this have been a ground-up Switch 2 title? That seems like a poor decision. Maybe that has something to do with the strained relationship here. Maybe that was a decision made by Mercury Steam and not so much Nintendo, although I feel like Nintendo would have control for something like that, so I'm not sure. But that is also what Nash Weedle heard. Now, the assumption now is that when it does come out, Metroid Ravenous, it would be a Switch 2 exclusive, and he speculates, this isn't a rumor, but he speculates that maybe one of the reasons why it's taking longer is because they are trying to make sure it has proper Switch 2 enhancements, and it feels like a sizable leap over what would have been a Switch 1 title. So that's interesting to me, but it's also a little bit concerning. That said, Metroid Dread was an incredible game that came out in 2021. They did an excellent job with that one, and I do think Nintendo will ultimately still make sure that this is a good game. So I'm not super worried about Metroid Ravenous, but it is interesting to consider what we're hearing here in terms of its development challenges. But the belief is, since it's recently been rated, that it's not that far off from announcement, and it could even be announced in this upcoming September Nintendo Direct. That's when we think it's going to happen. It's talked about in the podcast, and well, usually there's a September Nintendo Direct, so that wouldn't really be too surprising. Although personally, I was thinking we might not see this until next year. Of course, I won't complain if it's this year, for sure. But as I said earlier, this is not just Metroid stuff. There are other things talked about in this podcast, such as The Legend of Zelda. And so, in terms of new information here, both Attack the Backlog and Nash Weedle talk about how they were thinking that it made sense for Ocarina of Time Remake to be shown off again in August before all the different gaming events, starting with Gamescom at the end of the month, and then other things happening afterwards. That's what they were thinking, and that's what I've been thinking as well, actually. However, Nash Weedle has said that recently he's heard from a source that he considers to be very reliable, so he now believes this, that Nintendo will not be showing off the Ocarina of Time Remake again until September, which then just has us thinking, okay, they are prepping a big Nintendo Direct where we're just going to see this again. However, there's some pretty big implications with that, right? So if we're waiting until September to see the Ocarina of Time Remake again, what is Nintendo going to talk about between now and then? We do know about the Dust Bloods network test, so that's got to happen sometime soon. There could potentially be some kind of shadow drop that Nintendo has planned. Maybe there is still something to this idea of the Super Metroid remake coming out this year for the 40th anniversary of Metroid. possibly. Even if Nash Weedle heard that it's being developed at a slow pace, perhaps there's some conflation going on there with Metroid Ravenous. But also, if we're not seeing the Ocarina of Time remake until a September Direct, that has implications for the Direct itself. How would that be handled? Would Nintendo actually be willing to have kind of like the Direct in part be like a big 40th anniversary celebration, just like the Direct last year, or they still give us a big update on the Ocarina of Time remake in the same presentation, perhaps even in the same half as when they also reveal the live-action Zelda movie, or rather give us the first proper trailer? Could we have two big Zelda trailers in a Nintendo Direct, one about the movie and one about the game? And at first I thought, maybe they would want that to be separate, but maybe the way it's going to be handled, they would kind of fuel each other. That's possible, but I'm certainly curious what you guys are thinking about this. Does it make sense for Nintendo to wait until a Nintendo Direct to show off more about the Ocarina of Time remake and have it in a presentation alongside the first trailer for the live-action Zelda movie? Or perhaps is it maybe the case that this comes with the implication that we will not be seeing a trailer for the Zelda movie in a September Direct, and that will be handled separately? There's certainly a few considerations to be had here. Yet, there's some more little bit of Zelda nuggets that came out from this podcast. They talk about, not just Nash, but also Attack the Backlog talks about how they've heard there's something going on. There's something planned for Twilight Princess. And I find this really interesting because the way they talk about it as if there'd be some enhancements made to this. And they're even suggesting that it may not even come out for Switch 1, which to me seems very odd because we're talking about getting the Ocarina of Time remake really soon. And in my eyes, once this Ocarina of Time remake happens, it sets the stage for there to be other ambitious remakes here, such as Majora's Mask. That would be the natural follow-up because that's a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. And then after that, we can talk about having the Wind Waker or Twilight Princess, which would be years away, by the way. I assume these projects would take 4 to 5 years each time. And so I guess from that perspective, maybe if they don't see the Twilight Princess remake happening for at least another 10 years or so, if not more, then they could still put out something for Twilight Princess in the not-so-distant future. But they're talking about this happening, like, soon. And so what would this mean? Would they also have a Switch 2 exclusive enhanced version of Twilight Princess within a couple months of the Ocarina of Time remake? I think the answer to that, personally, like just in terms of what I think makes sense, is no, unless it's something a bit more bare bones. Like if they're just porting over Twilight Princess HD for Switch 1, and then they have some enhancements on Switch 2 where maybe it runs at 60 FPS with 4K upscaling, that makes sense to me. Maybe add a mouse mode or something like that, sure. But otherwise, if they're talking about something more ambitious to come out soon, that just doesn't make any sense to me, and I just don't believe that. I think that would be off. Of course, they're doing a lot of speculation here. They've heard that Twilight Princess is coming, and perhaps with some additions, but those additions, there's certainly a lot of wiggle room in terms of what that might mean. That could just be like quality of life updates, adapting it for the Switch or the Switch 2, and if we're talking about a Switch 2 version, what I mentioned, 60 FPS, 4K resolution. 60 FPS might even be possible on Switch 1. I believe they actually made Skyward Sword HD 60 FPS, so it's certainly plausible. And so that's what's going on with this Zelda Rumors stuff. And I'll just say that the premise of having a Nintendo Direct where we see Metroid Ravenous revealed for the first time, and then we also have a Zelda Anniversary section and has the first trailer for the live-action Zelda movie and a proper trailer for the Ocarina of Time remake where we see some serious gameplay of whatever this truly is, that spells for an epic Nintendo Direct to me. So that would be really cool. Even if it ends up being the case where we have to wait just a few weeks longer than maybe we're hoping for to see Ocarina of Time, in the grand scheme of things, not really a big deal, and it could spell for an incredible presentation. And yet, there's still a little bit more nuggets that came out. And those nuggets are coming from Nash here, where he's saying, and he's not saying this is going to be happening in the next Nintendo Direct, but he's starting to hear some things for something Kirby, and also a new IP. What could this new IP be? Like, that's just so ambiguous. There's so much potential there for what that could be. Is that something more core-centric, something more casual-centric? Really, it's just so ambiguous that, I mean, you could just kind of guess that Nintendo will be announcing a new IP in a Nintendo Direct, and there's a solid chance you would just get that right by blindly guessing that. So, I don't know how much stock I should put into this, but I'm certainly curious, and I do wonder what is next for Kirby. Typically, Kirby comes out almost pretty much on an annual basis with spin-offs and such too. It may be the case that they're just putting a lot more time and effort into a direct follow-up to Forgotten Land, which is an incredible Kirby game. The best one in my opinion, and it's also the best selling, so I think that kind of helps to serve my point. So they might just be hard at work on getting the next 3D Kirby game ready, and maybe that's something that could be shown off next year and could help to fill up 2027. And we think about how we've heard that maybe 3D Mario is coming out next year, and we already know about Pokemon Winds and Waves, and Xenoblade Genesis, and what I assume would be Metroid Ravenous coming out next year, and then maybe Forgotten Land 2. That's sounding like a pretty incredible year in my opinion. Of course, this is all rumor stuff filled with speculation. Let me know what you all think in the comments below. What makes sense to you? What sounds interesting? Tell me. But that's all for now. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.